Wszystko zaczęło się od króla Jagiełły. Mała Łodzia stała się miastem, które w XIX wieku rozwijało się najszybciej na świecie. W ciągu zaledwie 60 lat od powstania pierwszej manufaktury powstaje przemysłowa, wielonarodowościowa metropolia. Jednak wiatry historii nie zawsze jej sprzyjały. To, co zniszczył los, odbudowują łodzianie. Nasza Łódź. Miasto wielkich szans. Od 600 lat w sercu Polski i Europy.
Jesteśmy Polakami. Jesteśmy niezwykłym społeczeństwem. Zawsze w obliczu wielkiego wyzwania potrafimy się mobilizować. Potrafimy stawić czoła wielkim wyzwaniom. Bo nie potrafimy stać obojętnie. Bo obchodzi nas bezpieczeństwo i przyszłość naszych dzieci. Bo wierzymy, że nadzieja zwycięża apatię, lęk i strach. Bo mimo wszelkich przeciwności nigdy się nie poddajemy. Potrafimy ciężko pracować, wspierać się i działać razem. Bo zależy nam na naszej ojczyźnie, naszym osiedlu, naszej ulicy. Bo chcemy naszych niezbywalnych praw i wolności. Bo nie oddamy naszych marzeń. Nadchodzi punkt zwrotny.
Dzień dobry Państwu.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Let me start saying that we would like to thank you for your presence. This shows, the number of participants in the audience shows that human rights is not the topic that people are bored with, and this is what we would like to thank you for. Let me introduce briefly our panelists. I will definitely need an extra hour to do it in the right way, so just briefly. Professor Zdzisław Kędzia, for many years working for the Faculty of Law and Administration at the University of Bodnar and Polish Academy of Sciences, our Polish face of human rights at the United Nations, and the name which opens all doors. Thank you very much for joining us.
W kolejności pani doktor Grażyna Baranowska.
Dr. Grażyna Baranowska,
Poznańskie Centrum Praw Człowieka.
Poznań Center for Human Rights, Institute of Legal Sciences here in Polish Academy of Sciences, Hertie School in Berlin, and member of the UN's Working Group for Forced Missing. This is the elite group that Grażyna joined last year. We hope to discuss these experiences today. Dr. Hanna Machińska,
Wykładowczyni Uniwersytetu Warszawskiego.
lecturer at the Warsaw University, former
szefowa Biura Rady Europy w Europie.
deputy ombudsman, human rights defender in Europe.
Haniu, bardzo dziękuję.
Our great pride. Hanna, thank you for joining us.
Pan profesor Adam Bodnar.
Professor Adam Bodnar,
Dziekan Wydziału Prawa.
the Dean of the
SWPS,
Faculty
były
of
rzecznik praw
Law,
obywatelskich,
former
wykładowca,
ombudsman,
obrońca praw człowieka.
lecturer, human rights defender.
Zacznę od takiego pytania
Let
skierowanego
me
do
start
wszystkich i
with
poproszę
a
Państwa
question
o
to all
odpowiedzi, refleksje.
panelists. I would like to hear
Przejdziemy
your
do
thoughts
takich
and
bardziej
reflections
zindywidualizowanych,
on the subject
kwestii.
matter, and then we'll
Ale właśnie,
turn to
wydaje mi
more
się, że
individualized
Pan
questions. Okay, I do apologize. My name is Aleksandra Gliszczyńska-Grabias. I work for the Institute of Legal Sciences, Polish Academy of Science.
Przypomniałam sobie dlatego, że właśnie ja również często się nad tymi kwestiami punktów zwrotnych w prawach człowieka
deliberate on the turning points in human rights in my professional field.
Więc właśnie, czy prawa człowieka znajdują się dziś
Human rights, are they at a turning point? Or perhaps I should ask another question. At what stage are the human rights nowadays, not only in Poland, but also in Europe and globally?
Może być tak,
It might be so that the turning point in a dramatic or a negative sense is ahead of us. One of the factors that make me think about it this way is something that I have been observing for some time, taking over the discourse by populist governments and changing their sense. A specific example can be the approach to the hatred speech. As victims of such rhetorics, majority groups are presented, very often also representatives of the government who are created as victims of hate as a result of their rightist opinions, while the entire concept of defense against the hatred speech is to defend minority groups. The Ministry of Science has been working on an idea to introduce protection against disciplinary consequences against lecturers who dare express homophobic comments or share such content. Are human rights in danger?
Adam?
Szanowni Państwo, bardzo dziękuję za zaproszenie na Igrzyska Wolności.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for having me. I remember Freedom Games in Piotrkowska Street. This is when we were also talking about human rights. There was a panel on the ban of tortures and non-humane treatment, why we should fight against the tortures in everyday situations and lives. But referring to your question, whether this is a turning point, I would like to consider whether this is not the issue of having too few allies in this area. I mean people for whom this is the key matter in internal policy and foreign policy. During Trump's term of office, a lot of bad things happened, but there is an increasing number of states which consider that human rights can be sacrificed against other rights. This happens in countries like Poland, for instance. Hence the question, who is going to claim for such rights? Superpowers and super empires have been growing since Russian aggression on Ukraine. A new Iron Curtain has been emerging. So we are at the point in time when we start thinking whether this is the idea that applies to the whole world. Aleksandra Matwiejczuk mentioned it in her Nobel Prize speech. She claimed that we need to restore belief and understanding why human rights are important for our political communities and the whole world. And another thing which is a turning point are various political
postrzeganie praw człowieka, a
aspects
także
that force us
i do odpowiedzi
to
na pytanie, jak
seek
chcemy ten
new
świat
definitions
no i po
and
pierwsze,
defining
zmiany
how
klimatu.
we want
Jeszcze kilka lat
to
temu nie łączyliśmy aż tak bardzo tematu praw człowieka
redesign
z
the world. Previously, we had not been associating human rights with climate change. Climate activists often claim
konsekwencją zmiany
that
klimatu
as a
jest
result
naruszenie
of
prawa
climate
do życia,
change, the right to live,
ale
the
także
personal freedom are violated, and it also contributes to international migrations and development of
która w ogóle
exclusion
dotyka samej
zones.
istoty człowieczeństwa,
AI
definicji
also
ludzkiej godności i tego, w jaki sposób
refers to
należy
human dignity
regulować
and how
sztuczną inteligencję
we
tak,
could
aby ona w
regulate
którymś momencie
AI in
nie
order
zaczęła zagrażać
to prevent a
naszemu
situation in
posługiwaniu
which
się,
it
a
poses
także,
a hazard to
naszym
our
relacjom
communication
między
and
ludźmi,
our
naszej prywatności czy naszej
interhuman
godności.
relations,
I
our
wreszcie
privacy
trzecie
or
wyzwanie to są
dignity.
już wspomniane
And
przeze
the
mnie
third
migracje,
challenge is
międzynarodowe,
related to
ponieważ one
international
stykają się z tym, co jest
migrations,
populizmem,
which
i z tym, że
are
migracje,
related to
międzynarodowe
populism.
z jednej strony należy
International
zadbać o to, aby odbywały się w sposób
migrations
zgodny ze standardami praw
should,
człowieka, z drugiej strony rodzi to sprzeciw
be
w poszczególnych państwach, także
imposed
państwach
according to
demokratycznych.
standards,
Teraz powstaje
but this
pytanie,
is a
jak
problem
pogodzić,
in
jak
some democratic
kwadraturę
states
koła.
as well.
Z jednej strony
So
mamy
how
normy,
to
które są
make it work?
ustabilizowane
On the
od
one
lat,
hand, we've
a
got
z drugiej
standards
strony
that have
praktyka
been
wprowadza
established many years ago, but the
I
practice
ostatnio
does not
chciałbym
match it. And the last thing I would like to
wstępie,
mention
to
in the
jest,
brief
to,
introduction.
że system praw człowieka opierał się
The
na
human
szanowaniu,
rights system
tego,
was
co mówią
based on
organizacje
respecting
międzynarodowe,
what
organy,
international
sądownicze,
organizations,
komitety
bodies,
ONZ-owskie,
UN's
że jednak ten system był
units
tworzony na zasadzie
mentioned. This
takiego
system
peer review,
was
wzajemnego
created
się, kontrolowania,
based on
wskazywania, jak należy
peer review,
naprawiać różne sytuacje, które
namely
stanowią
how to repair some situations which constitute violation of human rights. Many countries choose what they are going to respect and what they are going not to respect. Hence, the system is less and less efficient, which I consider a huge
Tak naprawdę szereg
hazard.
problemów i
So, a
pytań
number
nie
of
wiadomo.
turning
Pani,
points and unknown
dziękuję
factors.
bardzo
Hanna?
za zaproszenie.
Thank you very
I
much
to
for
jest dla mnie
inviting
bardzo,
me.
i dla nas wszystkich bardzo ważna
This is
debata,
for me and for us all a very important
Prawa człowieka
debate.
to trochę dzisiaj
Human
znikający
rights
punkt.
are
Znikający punkt
like a
zarówno,
vanishing
w
point,
narracji władzy,
vanishing
jak
both
również
in the
w
narrative of
kontekście
the authorities
Jeżeli popatrzymy
and
na,
vanishing
nasze uczestnictwo, na nasze
when we
wspieranie praw człowieka. I
take a
myślę,
look
że
how we
ten
support human
znikający
rights.
punkt jest właśnie najbardziej
The
widoczny,
vanishing point is
na granicach,
most
na różnych
visible
granicach.
at borders,
2 dni
different
temu
borders.
Byłam w Strasburgu, miałam
2 days
przyjemność,
ago, I was
rozmowy,
in
ale była bardzo
Strasbourg
trudna rozmowa
when
na
I
temat,
participated in a
uchodźców, którzy przemieszczają się
difficult
przez granicę
discussion on
turecko-bułgarską,
refugees who move through
warunków, w
the
jakich
border between
przebywają na
Turkey
terenie
and
Bułgarii.
Bulgaria and on the conditions in which they stay in this place. When I was watching photos, I have to say they were so moving,
dzieci, kobiet,
of children, males, females,
urągających godności.
in
Ale przecież
conditions
jeżeli
that
w Lampedusa
do
mamy
not match
podobne
human dignity.
sytuacje.
In
Dramaty
Lampedusa,
na Morzu
similar
Śródziemnym.
things happened. The same
Przejdźmy na
applied to
granicę
the Mediterranean Sea.
polsko-białoruską.
Let's move to the Polish-Belarusian border.
Tak drastyczne, gdzie dzisiaj
We
byśmy
saw
powiedzieli,
photos
że
which were
państwo,
so
które dopuszcza
drastic
się tak
that
haniebnych
we could say
czynów,
that a state
nie
that
ma
commits
prawa,
such acts
być państwem europejskim,
has no right to be
jako państwo
a European
europejskie, które
country,
zobowiązało się do
a
przestrzegania
member state
demokracji,
that
rządów prawa.
undertook to observe human rights and the rule of law.
Niedopuszczalne jest to, żeby
It is unacceptable that in the 21st century
moralność
the morality gives place to force. It is unacceptable when we take a look at the law, which is actually nothing more than only an illusion of law, having nothing in common with international law standards, when the rights of refugees are violated in an open way. These are refugees escaping wars and dramas. I would like to say it is very important in this internal communication. The very fact that the authorities put the human rights and law aside, this shows that safety is most important. We, citizens of different countries, including Poland, say safety at all costs. We do not notice the drama that these people experience. We say we need to protect our borders because this is our safety. But such narrative could lead to other communication. We say we are going to protect our borders at all costs, and our approach becomes more radical because there are other groups who violate our peace, LGBTQ+, and other people who do not match our standards. This is what the authorities say. We are at a turning point. This is the point when we should notice that we will damage approach characterized by empathy and by the will to help those in need. So, where are we? Unfortunately, when we look at what we can call our fuses, meaning Europe, European jurisdiction, case law of human rights, and the tribunal, we can see that there are not enough human rights. It means international organizations bargain. We need to take state opinions into consideration, safety first, and this is a dramatic point. Save for activists and bottom-up movements, we would be enslaved completely. So we should restore the most important value of human rights, the value of protecting every individual who needs such protection, regardless of the time and space.
Czyli zasadniczo taki dramatyczny.
Right, so this is quite a dramatic turning point. Grażyna, do you perceive it this way? Thank you very much for having me and for the dramatic but true opinions about the turning points ahead of human rights, not only in Poland but also in Europe, but also globally. I would like to start with a more optimistic note. We should perceive a turning point as the moment when we can seek better solutions to handle the problems we have. The legal and human world faced a number of such challenges throughout the last century. Looking at the example of the last 20-30 years, we could refer to the Balkan War, which changed the approach to human rights. We also can focus on the war with terrorism. Polish authorities were also involved in it. So we should consider what to do in order to strengthen and better preserve human rights. Not all of them were good, but many of them were. Looking at the migration, we can think positively how we can protect human rights which have been violated recently, and in the near future they can be violated even stronger. These are the areas where we notice that. As a researcher, I think this is what I know, what I can do, and what I can focus on. As a Polish citizen, as a person representing this and coming from this area of Europe, when I felt we violated human rights. One of them was the situation at the Belarusian border, and the other one was the war, has been the war in Ukraine. During both events, the basic human rights have been violated on a mass scale. Even though we've got a broad range of human rights, we are not able to do anything about it. For me personally, this is a very heavy, challenging experience. Owing to the instruments we have, we can name the breaches, the violations. We know that the people who violate human rights will be taken responsible for them one day. What we notice in Poland, Europe and UN, we use instruments that have not been used before. Now it's all black and white, and it will be really difficult to pretend that the world did not know about it. The second component, as Aleksandra mentioned, I have been an UN's expert for a year. The two issues that are important for me is to seek solutions, what we can do at the UN's to contradict it. I do remember one of the first discussions in which I participated. It was a discussion on Wagner's group. We were deliberating on the Russian group committing terrible crimes in Ukraine and what we can do about it.
How should we address the authority in Russia? So member states of our working group were from Africa, and they were surprised that we were shocked and that we needed to do something, because they had known the Wagner's group for many years and they knew the ways which I found so disturbing in Ukraine. They knew it from Africa because the Wagner group operates in the same way, but it is very distant. It's so far away from us, so we are not that much interested in what's going on outside of Europe, so we didn't know about this. So if we start being interested in more distant places, we would be able to have this knowledge and we would know what we should counteract. So another lesson, so that was the lesson. I decided to observe what is going on in other countries. Then I learned that Russia was using terrible methods in Syria, and the same methods are used in Ukraine. I say we, us, meaning the civil society, so we need to protest it. And if we do this, maybe we will be able to counteract it. So my lessons are that we should look beyond my country, beyond our region, because what is happening in other countries can happen also in Europe. Thank you.
Optymistyczny głos.
It was an optimistic voice, and we need optimism, although you are talking about very important and difficult issues. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you for inviting me to this panel.
Trochę w nawiązaniu do tego, co powiedziała Grażyna.
Referring to what Grażyna has said,
Takie pytanie, znaczy uważam, że w ogóle
I think
zwrotny to jest
that the
świetny
turning
termin.
point is a great marketing notion.
Natomiast co ono znaczy
What does it
w konkretnym
mean
kontekście praw człowieka?
in the specific context of the human rights?
Tutaj w tych głosach, które już padały,
We've already heard
bardzo ciekawych i bardzo takich inspirujących chyba nas.
interesting and inspiring
Wiele wskazówek na to, że
thoughts.
właściwie
We heard a lot of guidance which indicated whether it is the turning point or not, what is it all about. But I think it's quite difficult because we can understand this notion differently.
czy mamy do czynienia z
First, we can ask ourselves a question: are we dealing something with the turning point with the human rights? We were discussing some standards and instruments. They are still effective. Sometimes they are more effective, sometimes less.
Przyjąłbym takie założenie,
I would
że
like to make the following assumption.
takie ogólne założenie,
The
że
general
los
one.
praw człowieka zależy w
The
ostateczności
history
od
of human rights, the human rights depend on people, not on institutions and procedures, but on people. The institutions and the procedures, of course, are necessary to protect human rights.
prezes Sądu Najwyższego Stanu
President of the High Court in the United States, Frankfurter, said the history of freedom is the history of procedural guarantees and warranties. If somebody affects them, if somebody affects the institutions that protect human rights, that means that this person is taking our rights away from us. This is the experience which is quite close to us. We do not have to leave Poland to realize what it means when somebody breaks the rule of law, when we have the situation where the Constitutional Court is weakened. What does it mean to attack independent judges? Once upon a time, an American professor was coming in a taxi, and actually President Roosevelt was fighting for the second term. So he wanted to convince the taxi driver that he should vote. So the driver said, I would go anyway. So this professor asked, who are you going to vote for? Definitely not for Roosevelt. So professor asked, why? Why not Roosevelt? Because he attacked the high courts. So we have to disseminate this message.
z reguły sceptyczne na temat praw człowieka.
Authorities usually quite skeptical about human rights, and they are afraid of the control. It's quite a common phenomenon. If not the whole government, maybe some fractions would be interested in this approach. But I do agree that here we are dealing with a change of form of ruling. So the populists have gained power, and they are using different opportunities to undermine our achievements. And it is a big problem. To identify this problem is not enough. The goal is that we need to take part in elections, just like this taxi driver, that we should choose the right people who will be interested in restoring the right meanings to some terms. That's true.
Ja mam wrażenie, że
But I also think that the second space, I mean, not the government, not the authorities, but people, citizens, maybe it's even more important in the time of crisis. So we need to maintain the ideas, we need to make sure that things should have their meanings restored. So we have to ask ourselves the question, at which stage are we already in? There are lots of interesting studies conducted by different institutions. I don't want to bore you with statistics, but I would like to highlight some aspects. In 2018, Ipsos, a well-known institution, published the results of the study on the awareness on the human rights. The question, is there something like other universal human rights? Ladies and gentlemen, when you hear the results, you'll be probably quite surprised. So, most societies that gave the yes answer were Turkey, 92%, China, 85%, Hungary, 79%, Poland, 52%. So 30 countries took part in this survey, and Poland was the second from the end of this list. Now, I'm going to say who was for the statement that there are no universal rights, and then there was the question whether the universal rights shape the civil society, and Poland was ranked as the last. The average of these countries was that 72% of respondents decided that the human rights are important. That's all I wanted to tell you about this study. A very interesting study was performed 3 years ago by an agency of basic rights of the European Union. What did we find out from this study? In general, young people aged between 16 and 29 years perceives less value in the human rights than the older generations. Actually, it wasn't only about human rights, but also about democracy as such. People believe in the principles of democracy, but too many people feel that they are a little bit ignored, especially people who have lower education, whose the life standard is lower. Does it mean that we should decide that we are at the turning point? There was another study in 2019 delivered also by Ipsos. And what did it tell us? Poland was in the leading of 19 countries, so it was about observing international law and human rights. So there was quite a lot of confusion. Where are we? Where are we? When we consider the human rights, we don't know whether the glass is half full or half empty. Undoubtedly, we can say that there are clear deficiencies and deformation of the human rights among the citizens. They cause social frustration, and the frustration leads to the situation where citizens want to listen to populism. It also causes the feeling of uncertainty, which results from the feeling that people lose their identity. They feel that they are left behind. So what can we do? Because, well, I'm trying to give you some descriptions, but these descriptions would have to be more detailed, looking specifically at the conditions in Poland. Secondly, I think that what is very important is that we should address
te grupy społeczne,
These social groups, we should communicate with these social groups for whom these values of human rights cause most doubts. So we have to get to know these people. We have to find out why they do not see a lot of value in the human rights. It seems that it's extremely important that we should refer to these aspects that determine people's standard of life. The language of human rights should be explained, should be translated into our language, the language we use in our life. We shouldn't stay in a specialized bubble full of technical terms. I think it's very important. Therefore, in my opinion, we need to do our best to make sure that the discourse on the human rights should be translated into the language of citizens. Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor. I'm looking at the time. It's running very fast. I would like to allow the audience to give some questions. So I'm going to give up a series of questions I have prepared for the speakers, but maybe I would like to ask you for some reflections concerning the contribution of the professor, and then we will give the mics to the audience. Professor Kędzia always inspires and forces us for deeper reflection. For the past year, I worked very intensively on one issue, on preparing the debate for the Council Summit in Reykjavik. It was the summit that was to reform the Council of Europe, which is the key organization which is involved in democracy and human rights in Europe after Russia was expelled from the Council. So I think that this organization is contributing to a very important change. In the 90s, 40s and 50s, the Council was to reform to meet all the challenges. And it did not happen. A declaration was adopted. Everyone will find a lot of interesting aspects in this declaration. For example, I find it interesting about the execution of judgments by the European Court of Human Rights. So some institutions were going to be reformed, but there was no deep change. So during this process, I realized that to have a big change in the context of human rights, we should reform the UN Council of Security. Everything else requires just minor changes that would impact the functioning of the states. But if we were to have a deep change, the Council of Security should be changed. But to have this change, you would have to have World War III. I realized that maybe it's not that bad, because we do not want to have World War III. We do not want to go back to the times which facilitated establishment of the UN and developing Declaration of Human Rights. So this is how we should perceive this. We need to consider what has led to development of this idea. And although the rights are violated, we should focus how to get as much as we can from the human rights. How should we force the states to respect human rights? And maybe now this picture looks quite dim. Still, a lot of good things are happening, as Dr. Baranowska was saying not long ago. UN Declaration for the Rights of Disabled Person was adopted, the Istanbul Convention for Women's Rights, and there was another declaration to promote equality policy or digital policy. So we need to, of course, we need to improve the world in terms of human rights, and we need to protect them. Thank you.
Proszę Państwa,
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to refer to Reykjavik. The fourth summit of the Council of Europe was to be a turning point. The day before yesterday in Strasbourg, we discussed how to increase the role of NGOs. Which place should be provided for the NGOs in the European system, because it's not just increasing the role in the member states, but also in Europe. I'm quite disillusioned with this declaration, but from this political declaration we need to get as much as possible. There are some obligations described, signed by President Duda on behalf of Poland. Therefore, today, NGOs, we decided that we need to approach President Duda and let him know about our expectations. We need to ask him how these obligations are going to be fulfilled. Very soon there will be a meeting of NGOs. We've got a letter of proposals, and this is what we will be discussing. The human rights can be valid, important to people if people have them in their hands, if the human rights are translated into appropriate actions. So this will happen when activists go to Strasbourg for interim measures, when they approach the High Court of Justice, when they go to the national courts. So in another way, they have to be active. So this activity is the only security against authoritarian authority that infringes our rights. There are some areas where we are not active. I would like to add that I'm very impressed with young people, with youngsters who filed a complaint against 23 member states, including Poland, and this complaint will be processed by the European High Court of Human Rights. So they stated that the member states are not filling their obligations in terms of the climate change. So I think that the bottom-up approach has to provide a new dimension to human rights.
Bardzo dziękuję.
Thank you very much. And now I would like to give two examples and describe them using simple language. As the professor said, to talk about human rights in a way which is understandable and shows the possibility of change and impact. I would like to start with a negative question and follow with an extremely positive one. I deal with forced missing. This means that the state arrests a person and pretends not to do so. It seems to me that there is no such thing in Poland, so our country has not ratified the treaty.
Polska była zaangażowana.
Forced missing was something that Poland was involved in due to, in relation to secret CIA prisons. The knowledge I have gained on forced missing, unfortunately, is useful in Poland because I advise to organizations who deal with persons missing at the Polish-Belarusian border. There are examples of such activities which I investigated theoretically, and I never thought it would be useful for me. This is the example which proves that you should never say never. Some mechanisms can be moved or transferred from one country to another. That was the sad example, and now a positive one. Many countries have not discussed ratifying the Forced Missing Act, arguing it in such a way that they do not have to ratify it because there is no such thing as forced missing. In Switzerland, there was a fierce discussion on the subject matter. It was said that Switzerland needs it like a fish needs a bike, but finally Switzerland ratified it. Tomorrow, the first proceedings against a person from Łukaszenka's regime. He was responsible for forced missing of opposition activists in 1990. He has been living in Switzerland for some years, so he is sued by Swiss court for forced missing, owing to the fact that Switzerland decided to ratify the convention.
I moim zdaniem jest i dla Polski
In
szczególnie,
my opinion,
zależy nam na tym, żeby
it is important for
ścigać
Poland
osoby, które są odpowiedzialne za naruszenia praw człowieka i w Białorusi, i w
find
Ukrainie.
people who are responsible for violating human rights and forced missing in Ukraine and Belarus. This should be the next step towards discussing ratifying the act. The situation in Belarus is dramatic, and some positive information from Europe can bring some hope. And this is a signal to follow the case. The case is going to start in St. Gallen tomorrow. I hope Polish media will broadcast it as well.
Informować. Bardzo ciekawe.
Proszę Państwa, jaki mamy obraz praw człowieka?
What image of human rights do we have? Even if we listen to our discussion.
Jesteśmy w takim absolutnym dołku. Mamy dramat w dziedzinie praw człowieka.
We are in a situation
Business as usual.
where the human rights are in a terrible condition, or is it business as usual?
Wszystko idzie co ku lepszemu.
I don't want to say that it all goes to the right direction, as I wouldn't sound convincing.
Wydaje mi się, że to, co jest cechą charakterystyczną i towarzyszy naszej dyskusji,
There is a characteristic feature of our discussion. I dare say that once again, human rights in our country are a problem which matters to us. We notice hazards, violations, and we understand that this is not something distant. There was a period when we started believing that these are problems far from us, that we can offer help, but we do not need help. It seems that there is a cold shower reflection and nothing should be taken for granted. If we want human rights to rule our life, if we want to arrange our life according to
musimy
human
zdawać
rights
sobie sprawę z tego,
promise,
że działanie na rzecz tych praw
we have to
zaczyna się każdego dnia.
be aware that human
To
rights
jest
should
naprawdę potrzeba świadomości, zaangażowania
be
na miarę
fought
jaką
for
możemy.
every day.
Każdego
We should get involved as much
Bo
as
to
we
od
can.
nas w ostateczności będzie zależeć, czym będą te prawa
It will
człowieka.
be
Proszę Państwa,
up to us whether human rights will be
wyobrażam
guaranteed.
sobie, że kiedy mówimy o statystykach, to nas to męczy.
We talk about statistics,
Ale ja
and
muszę
this can be
powiedzieć, że
tiring for us.
Trochę przygotowując się również do naszego spotkania,
But getting ready
poświęciłem
for this
czasu,
meeting, I spent some time
trochę czytając wyniki rozmaitych badań,
reading the results of
dotyczących
studies
świadomości
and
w zakresie
research on the awareness of human rights.
Mamy do czynienia w Polsce z pewnym takim,
In Poland,
tak mi się wydaje, trochę takim schizofrenicznym postrzeganiem.
we have quite a schizophrenic approach to this domain. On one hand, we are all for, because human rights are a positive thing.
Mało tego, że jesteśmy
On the
za,
other
też
hand,
uważamy, że powinniśmy
we also
reagować na
think
sytuacje,
we
w których
should
prawa
respond
człowieka
to
są
situations in which
Bardzo wysoki odsetek
human rights are violated. A high percentage of respondents
opowiada się właśnie za tym,
claims that
żeby egzekwować prawa człowieka, żeby pociągać
we should enforce human rights and
a z drugiej strony, kiedy
punish
przychodzi do
those who
zestawienia
violate
rozmaitych
them.
interesów i wartości,
However, when we juxtapose various interests and
naszego bardzo
values,
liberalnego podejścia do
we
naruszania praw człowieka. Bardzo
are prone to more liberal approach to violating human
w sensie,
rights.
kiedy mówię o losie praw człowieka.
When I
Bardzo
talk
dużo
about
zależy
the
od nas.
lot of human rights, much depends on us, not only on the authorities and ruling party.
Bardzo dziękuję i bardzo przepraszam.
Thank you very much, and I do apologize because there's only 1 minute left. I encourage you to discussing human rights informally with our panelists.
Chciałam jeszcze na koniec przywołać
Just to
Wiktora
finish,
Osiatyńskiego,
I would like to quote
którego ogromnie
Wiktor Osiatyński,
w tych trudnych
whom
czasach.
we miss in these challenging times. Human Rights and Their Borders, his book. It's worth to reread it and find the answers to
kwestie bardzo, bardzo trudne związane z
challenging
ochroną
issues
praw
related to human rights
człowieka.
protection.
Myślę, że możemy właśnie skończyć może też takim właśnie wspomnieniem
I suppose
o
we
Wiktorze,
could
który był jedną z
end this
najwybitniejszych
panel remembering
postaci w
Wiktor
świecie,
Osiatyński, who was a
praw człowieka w
distinguished
Polsce.
specialist
Jeszcze raz
in
ogromnie
human
dziękuję.
rights in
Bardzo
Poland.
proszę
I would
jeszcze
like
raz
to
o aplauz.
thank once again to my panelists, a round of applause
A
for
może
them.
zabrzmi podziękowanie dla Agnieszki Holland właśnie za
We should thank Agnieszka Holland for her great
to jest przekaz.
film, and this is the very
To
important
też twarz
message,
praw człowieka w Polsce.
because also the face of human rights in Poland.
Bardzo dziękujemy.
Thank you very much.
It's not always easy to recognize. It may look like this, or like this. It may be a burden, but it is a responsibility that we embrace nonetheless. But if it means this for one person and this for someone else, maybe it ultimately means being there for one another. It isn't handed to us, but we know where to find it and how it feels, how it tastes, and what it sounds like when we finally have it. It means different things to different people, but for many, it means everything. And if we all fight for it, it will eventually bring us together.
Ihre Ausreise
Jestem z zawodu lekarzem. Zajmowała się diagnostyką chorób nowotworowych.
W Białorusi zajmowałam się mikrobiologią i molekularną biologią.
Byłem nauczycielem szkoły podstawowej.
Naszym celem jest budowanie umiejętności, które są ważne na polskim rynku pracy.
Szybko nabierają takiej pewności siebie, bardzo szybko się uczą.
Wszystko możliwe, kiedy starasz się.
Każdy wybór ma swoje konsekwencje.
Dziś na kazaniu o takich jak ty mówili, że to morderczynie.
A wiesz, że ta, która ci pomogła, trafi za kraty?
Trzeba mieć sumienie.
Jak mogłaś to zrobić własnej matce?
Aborcja to najgorsza zbrodnia.
Gdybym ja podjęła taką decyzję, nie byłoby cię tutaj.
Organy państwa nie będą przyglądać się temu obojętnie.
Życie i zdrowie kobiety jest najważniejsze.
Stop kryminalizacji aborcji.
Kobieta decyduje.
Dzień dobry.
Dzień dobry. Pan Zbigniew Hołdys.
Zgadza się. Dla znajomych Zbyszek.
Serio? Zbyszek. Nadchodzące wybory są zbyt ważne, żeby zostawić je bez kontroli. Dołącz do obywatelskiej kontroli wyborów. Zróbmy wybory bez picu.